Hello and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. In today's talk I was going to cover planetary combustion, or Graha Asta as it is called in Sanskrit, and I am talking about this from the perspective of Vedic astrology, or Jyotish. So let's get into it. So planetary combustion, or Graha Asta, what is it exactly? How would you identify it in somebody's chart? Well, technically, what happens is this is when a true planet gets close to the sun, and because it's close to the sun, it becomes invisible because it is overshadowed by the light of the sun. And when I'm talking about true planets here, I'm talking specifically about Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. So again, because the planet is so close to the sun, like if you were looking up at the sky, you wouldn't be able to see it anymore the closer it gets to the sun. So essentially it eclipses the planet. Now please note this is different from the phenomenon of a solar or lunar eclipse, which is created by Rahu and Ketu. And the thing is, how you determine, again, how close to the sun does it need to be? Well, you measure by the number of degrees on either side of the sun. So the closer to the sun that a planet is, the more of an effect that this phenomenon will have. So I've been taught actually two different ways of measuring. The first one is a little bit easier to do, especially if you're on the fly, working on the fly, interpreting a chart. So the first method is basically if the planet is 0 to 3 degrees on either side of the sun, it's considered extremely combust. There's a great effect from this phenomenon. If the planet is 4 to 6 degrees, it's very combust. If the planet is 7 to 10 degrees on either side of the sun, it's considered mildly combust. So again, the closer the planet is to the sun, the more effect this phenomenon will have. Method 2 is a little bit more precise, and then also consider retrogression for a couple planets here. So with Mercury, in the second method, we're looking at 14 degrees on either side of the sun. If Mercury is in retrogression at the time, then you would only consider 12 degrees on either side of the sun. So basically you lose 2 degrees there. And Venus is sort of similar. Venus, again, you're looking at 10 degrees on either side of the sun, so that's pretty close to method 1. But when Venus is in retrogression, it tightens up a bit and you lose 2 degrees. So if Venus is in retrogression, you're looking at 8 degrees on either side of the sun. So again, this method is a little bit more about splitting hairs, but different methods work differently for different people, I think. So Mars has the greatest degree of closeness to the sun. So Mars, if you look at 17 degrees on either side of the sun, Mars will be affected. Jupiter is 11 degrees on either side of the sun. So again, that's pretty close to 10 degrees in method 1. And Saturn is 15 degrees on either side of the sun. So, yeah, those are the methods. I think the other thing I need to mention is that you'll actually have more effect as the planet's moving towards the sun, and less effect if the planet's moving away from the sun. Again, these are just, kind of splitting hairs a little bit here. I actually find, if I'm kind of just looking, sort of quickly at a chart and, trying to see if there's combustion going on, I'll just see if a true planet is within 10 degrees of the sun. But I do give it a little bit more leeway. I don't exactly go by method 2 with, 14 degrees or 17 degrees or 15 degrees, that sort of thing. So about 10 degrees, I kind of have in my mind. But I don't think it's not like a hard stop or a hard start, like a very crisp. It's not a crisp thing here when we're looking at degrees, but just to give you an indication when you're looking at chart by eyesight, or, if you're actually calculating these things, what to look for. So that's a technical kind of way to assess whether a true planet is in combustion or Graha Asta. So what does this mean if a planet is in combustion? Well, there's a few things here. basically, you can think of it as the planet, since it's not visible in the sky anymore, and you have to consider that, Vedic astrology was developed, more than 5,000 years ago before any technology like telescopes or anything was used. So a lot of classical Jyotish was based on what you literally could visibly see in the sky. So when a planet is combust, the outer qualities or indications of the planet are less visible or influential in life. The other thing is that when a planet is that close to the sun, it also means it's the farthest away from Earth. So you can kind of think of it as, there's less influence or manifestation, on the earthly plane, kind of in the physical, concrete world. So natural benefic planets, though, there is a distinction here. So natural benefic planets, which are Jupiter, Venus, and Mercury, if Mercury is associated with other natural benefics, because Mercury can swing both ways depending on who it's influenced by. Natural benefic planets will have less ability to influence positively. So if you have Jupiter or Venus, for example, combust, you may see less, like with Jupiter, you may see less, what would an outer manifestation be? There would be less sort of like wisdom involved, there would be less sort of expansion involved. If Venus was combust, you might see less beauty, you might see less sociability, that sort of thing. Those are things that those planets represent. If, however, the planet is a natural malefic, it actually increases their ability to influence negatively, because it sort of tends to work the other. They kind of work in different ways. If it's a natural benefic, the more better place it is in a chart, the better condition it is. Like the more it sort of gains. It's sort of this upward spiral. It kind of gains like more. It becomes more of like a superhero. And with the natural malefic planets, the more kind of debilitated it is, or on the Rahu Ketu axis, or surrounded by other malefics, it just kind of creates a sort of downward spiral. And so combustion is sort of part of that. So if a natural malefic, which is Mars, Saturn, and Mercury, if Mercury is associated or aspected by other natural malefics, then those become more malefic, and their influence of malefic energy is more present. So the other thing is that you have to consider, like in a chart, whichever planets are combust, you have to look at the houses that those planets own, and the houses that the planets, that the combust planets own, are usually weaker. The other thing, though, is that even though, like I've been talking about, sort of the outer manifestations of a combust planet, whether they're natural benefics or natural malefics, the inner qualities of the planet, what that planet represents, are stronger. So you can kind of think of it as like, even though visibly, like the outward manifestation is eclipse, you can't see it like in your life, in the sky or in your life. The inner qualities, because you have the light, energy, vitality, sun, is kind of, bringing those more to life, but like internally. An exception to all this, though, is that if the sun, like if the planet that's combust is related to prosperity, and in some charts, in some people's charts, the sun can represent prosperity. For example, if it's considered the yogi, which the yogi planet for a chart is the planet that represents prosperity, or if it's a duplicate yogi, the sun would be considered a planet of prosperity. So if the sun is considered a planet of prosperity, and it's combusting Mars or Saturn, and maybe Mars and Saturn are also related to prosperity, so you're thinking, oh well, Mars and Saturn are prosperity, and these planets are eclipsed, they're combust, so there goes prosperity. But the sun, because the sun is like, again, sort of what you see now, because the other planets are combust, it actually saves prosperity. So regarding prosperity, if the sun specifically represents prosperity in a chart, positive prosperity, then prosperity will not be affected. So let's just talk about one example. So Mars, if Mars is combust in somebody's chart, so Mars can represent things like siblings and enemies. So if Mars is combust, you may not have siblings, or like maybe you're an only child, or maybe you had other siblings who didn't survive childhood, or Mars can also represent enemies. So maybe you don't tend to have very many enemies, or if you do have them, you don't see them very much, that sort of thing. They're at a distance at best. That's how this kind of energy can manifest. The thing, though, is that Mars, like other qualities and things that Mars represents, are things like courageousness, rebelliousness, innovative. They're sort of the kickstarters, of all the planets. They're a fiery planet. They like to start new things. They're not always great at, seeing things through, though. So if, Mars is combust, again, depending on how well it's conditioned, the placement of it, what other planets around it. So the more positively placed Mars is, even though it's combust, you'll get more of the oh, this person might be really courageous or really innovative, that sort of thing. If it's negatively conditioned, in addition to being combust, you'll get the more negative versions of the internal qualities of Mars, which can be things like impulsiveness or restlessness or aggressiveness. So, that's how Mars combust can show up in somebody or somebody's life. And let's just say Mars was Lord of the third house in somebody's chart. So that would be a Virgo Lugna or a Aquarius Lugna. I believe, let me count backwards here. Aquarius Lugna. Mars would be Lord of the third house. In Aquarius Lugna, the third house would be Aries, ruled by Mars. And in a Virgo Lugna, the third house would be Scorpio, which is also ruled by Mars. So these folks, if their Mars is combust, may have difficulties with hands and arms. Like they may actually have they might have had an accident or something that affected their hand or arm, because the third house represents hands and arms. And so you can kind of, also bring in the medical indications of the planet. The third house represents siblings, especially younger siblings, so that would actually kind of double up. You'd probably have even more issues with siblings, or not have siblings, or see them. The other thing is the third house represents things like classical arts and the trades. So that may make, if you're thinking about a profession along those lines, that may make it a difficult road. Yeah. So that's the interpretation of a planet combust, Graha Asta, and an example. So that, again, if you're looking at charts or looking at your own chart, it can help you with interpretation. So that's planetary combustion, or Graha Asta. I hope you found this helpful, interesting, and helpful as you go about navigating charts and navigating your own life. So until next time, take care. Namaste.